Today's guest on the Winning Teams podcast is Peter Docker. Now, Peter is the author of a book called Leading From the Jumpseat, which I would highly recommend. I've read it. I think it's a great book for leaders, potential leaders, current leaders, or anybody interested in the subject of leaders. His background is very interesting, very different careers. He's been in the RAF, very senior role in the RAF, and subsequently has gone on and worked in the corporate life, has been involved in organizations, have been involved in negotiation at the highest level, and has written this book. And he also is a keynote speaker of some note. But it's a great conversation. I really thoroughly enjoyed the conversation with Peter. We talk about the whole concept of leadership and what it means to lead, talks about the non-negotiables, talks about the commitment, talks about the difference between taking a stand and taking a position, talks about clarity and really helping people to get that clarity of what success and what winning would look like in their lives, not just in their career, but in their overall lives. And he also shares with us his non-negotiables as a leader, and as a leader in the business world, and as a leader in his community and in his family. So really, really fascinating conversation, one I thoroughly enjoyed. I took more of Peter's time than I said I would, but I'm grateful that I did, because I think he's got great wisdom to share with them. And I said, I highly recommend the book. So if you're listening to this and you want to help us to reach more people, please do subscribe to the podcast. Do give us a reviews. We'd love to do it. That's how we get out to more people and reach more people. And that is the object of the exercise. But in the meantime, sit back and listen to the very interesting and very entertaining Peter Docker. Peter, thank you so much for joining us here on the Winning Teams podcast. You're extremely welcome. I love your book, which we will talk about a bit more during the course of the interview. Maybe just to, for the audience, just to give a bit of context, you might just give a bit of background to who you are, what you've been doing, and how you've got to where you are.
John, it's a delight to be on your show. Thank you for having me. My journey started, it feels like a long time ago now, when I left university to join the Royal Air Force. I spent about 25 years in the Royal Air Force, became quite a senior officer as a pilot. I've led people during combat, which is a major leadership thing for me. Thankfully brought home everybody safe after that. I've led multi-billion-dollar programs, projects. I've negotiated with the Russians when the Berlin Wall came down. I fancy we could do with a bit more of that now, but that's another story. I've negotiated with the State Department of the US on export licensing. And then I left the Air Force because I thought there was more I could do. And I joined a consultancy working in high-risk environments around the world, such as mining, construction, and oil and gas, where people typically get killed or injured. And what we did was create a culture and a way of leading that ensured everyone went home safe to their families at the end of each day. So that was wonderful. About 3 years working in places like Kazakhstan, the Middle East, and Africa. But then I thought there was more I could do. And it was around about that time that a fellow called Simon Sinek published a book called Start With Why. And I connected with Simon. And long story short there, I ended up helping Simon take his message around the world. And I've visited 93 countries, worked with companies in most sectors that you can imagine. And it's been a wonderful privilege. And during that time, I co-wrote with Simon and David Mead, Find Your Why, which has sold really rather well around the world and continues to do so this day. But then I thought, well, there's more I could do. So a couple of years ago, I stepped away from Simon and I started to bring together everything I'd learned from working in crisis situations, unknown situations around different cultures and countries, and brought it together in the book that you've already mentioned, which is Leading from the Jumpseat, How to Create Extraordinary Opportunities by Handing Over Control. So that's the potted history that brings me here today.
So listening to that, should I expect that another year or so you'll have another moment where you see there's more I can do and do something different? Is that likely to happen?
Well, it almost sounds like I don't have staying power, doesn't it? But no, I think one of the greatest things is to stay curious.
Absolutely.
constantly learning. And, you know, one of the things that I'm a great believer in, after visiting 93 countries and working with so many different people and cultures, the one thing that strikes me is that what brings us together is so much more than what keeps us apart. And I think that's a great message of hope in the future. And I'd like to continue to build on that. So I'm working on one or two other projects which are complementary, which might involve Kilimanjaro, might involve the Atacama Desert and running across it. We shall see, but it's all in service of lifting others up.
Well, we should keep an eye on you and see exactly what you get into. But I said, you very kindly sent me the book, which I really enjoyed. I really did enjoy it, and it was, yeah. I mean, okay, I appreciate that. You know, we both work in very similar areas in terms of leadership and that. So you're singing to the choir. But what I also felt about it was that, you know, it was a very good read. So well done on that. But also, it's a very good handbook for people to have to actually kind of really kind of dip into when they've read it and come back and look at that. And you had a very nice process, which I'll talk about. But let me quote something that I actually just really connected with me. You said, "I firmly believe that every person in every organization is capable of accomplishing extraordinary things, achieving way more than they may even think possible. The key is first to connect with who we truly are at a human level." And it was that last piece that really kind of resonated with me, because connecting at that human level is easier said than done. And for many, it's uncomfortable. And for many, again, it's not the way we're trained. And I was just wondering, you know, can you just expand about that? And how do people really engage at that human level early on in a relationship where they are leading people?
Yeah. Well, actually, even before we're in a relationship where we're leading people, I think in order for us to do that better, it helps to really understand ourselves as individuals. And that's what I was getting at in that passage that you quoted from. And I think that the choices are in the clues are in the choices that we make in life. So what do I mean by really getting to know ourselves at a human level? It's about getting to understand what are those non-negotiables for us in life. You know, a couple of years ago, for example, I had received a phone call from my wife. She'd been involved in a car accident, and I dropped everything and went to her aid. There was absolutely nothing that would have got in my way to going and supporting my wife. And that, I think, many people will be able to relate to, because family is very close to us. You know, that's one of the non-negotiables, that we're there always for our family. And it releases this enormous amount of energy inside of us to step into that unknown and move forward even when we are facing uncertainty. So what really intrigued me was when we can tap into those other non-negotiables, they come together as an immense reservoir of energy to move us forward, even when perhaps we are a little bit fearful or we are in a place of uncertainty, because they give us the handrail, the guide, when there isn't a rule book to follow or it hasn't been done before. So finding those non-negotiables is really important, and the clues are in the choices we make. So for example, when I went to university over 40 years ago, I chose to do a double degree in two subjects, computing and electronic engineering, about which I knew nothing. But I managed to get the university to accept me. But the reason I was so focused on going for those subjects was because I knew that at that time, it gave me a really good chance of getting a well-paid job afterwards. And it was not about the money for me. It was about the fact that our family circumstances at the time, both my parents had lost their jobs. We were very hard up, not much money at all to go around. And I didn't want to be a burden on my parents, and I wanted to be in a position to support them in the future. So, you know, there is a clue as to one of the non-negotiables, and that is for me not being a burden on others and instead being in a position to help others. And when we start to stack these things up, as I say, they come together as that reservoir of energy to help us to step into the unknown and to push the boundaries of our comfort zone. And when we're very clear on that, when we're then facing a situation where we're leading others, and leadership by definition is often stepping into the unknown, then it gives us a solid foundation on which to build our approach and to lead those other people.
Yeah. And It's really interesting. I want to come back to the non-negotiables later on, just in a slightly different way. But when you're working with leaders, as I said, that we don't tend to get trained or taught how to actually engage with people at that human level, because we're about the task, we're about the role, we're about the objectives, we're about the goals, we're about the outcomes. How do we coach people to actually get in at that human level? Because you won't get the results, you won't get all the others if you don't actually do that first part. But that's not where we're really trained, is it?
You're absolutely right. It's almost, one could say, systemic. It starts at school. When we're at school, we focus on some subjects that we enjoy and perhaps become good at. And so we go on to university or college to study those in greater depth. And then we're hired in a job where we're putting those skills into practice, such as a computer programmer. And then the way we're rewarded, if you're really good at that, eventually you're promoted where you're no longer doing that. You're taking care of the people who are doing that. And to your point, we're very unprepared. We haven't been trained for that situation. And that's where many people start to falter, because we've been trained to be the person who knows the answer. That's how we've been rewarded. We've been the person to know the solution. And yet, if we lead in that way, when we have a team, if we lead in a way where we've always got to be the one with the answer, we become the constriction in the pipe.
Yeah.
Because the progress of our team can only be as quick as our own knowledge allows. So the opportunity is to become comfortable leading when we don't know the answer, and turn that perceived weakness into a strength, because then it's not about knowing the answer, it's about knowing the important questions to ask and holding the space where others in our team can step forward with parts of the solution, and then we draw on that collective genius. But in order to do that, we need to have those human skills. And that starts with having that deep human connection with who we are as individuals, as we've just discussed, because that then gives us the confidence to lead when we don't know the answer, and instead focus on holding that space for others to step up.
And it kind of leads into, and the way you structure the book, where you have your 4-stage process, which is about learning to fly, flying, teaching others to fly, and leading from the jump seat. And one of the things I thought was interesting when I was reflecting on that was that, learning to fly, the flying, and the teaching the others to fly, those three kind of, I get that. And then said, okay, and then leading from the jump seat, but that's different to teaching others to fly. And sometimes I wonder, do we kind of blend the two together? But you might just explain the 4 stages as you see it and how that plays out.
Certainly. I mean, there's clearly a flying metaphor here. And my background of flying large passenger jets lends itself to this, because, the flight deck of an aircraft is like a microcosm of leadership. I've seen some of the greatest leadership and very poor leadership too in that situation. But it's all set up. And the start of the book is all about a story when I just certified a brand new captain, and I was hitching a ride home from San Francisco via Washington Dulles. I sat on that jump seat, which is the 3rd seat on the flight deck, usually empty, but when you sat there, you can touch the pilots, you're that close. And we'd just got airborne out of San Francisco, and we had an emergency. And the new captain, Callum, was wrestling with the controls. And what I chose to do in those 2 seconds that followed would dictate whether we survived or not. But a bit of a spoiler alert, what I did was I chose to do nothing. Because in that moment, I didn't need to lead, I needed to become a great follower. And I needed Callum to feel that I had his back, to sense that, because that would empower him to do what he needed to do in that moment. Now, I'm talking to you, John, so clearly all worked out just fine. But that metaphor of leading from the jump seat, it made me think, well, you know what? In life, it is inevitable that we give up control. If you're the CEO of a company, you'll retire. If you're leading a team, you'll move on to another team. Or heck, even as a parent, your kids will grow up and leave home and start to lead their own lives. So it's inevitable. Leading from the jump seat is all about leading from that perspective, embracing that inevitability and focusing on lifting up others and preparing them to take the lead. So when we've taken that step back, what's deeply important to us will be carried on by that next generation. as it was with Callum.
Yeah, and just taking that example of Callum, because I was really taken with that, because firstly, what was going through my head when I was reading it, I thought, gosh, that must have been very hard to actually keep your mouth shut. Right? It was one that came into my head. But secondly, the thing that more importantly, what struck me about it was that to Callum, you demonstrated that you trusted him in that moment, right? Mm. And also he trusted you, that you were there, but you were playing the role that you should be playing, which was actually keeping quiet, but you were there. So the trust was very foundational for both of you in that moment, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And here's the thing, John, you know, it wasn't about that 2-second moment so much. What's more interesting, as people, when you read the whole story in the book, Callum invited me onto that flight deck. He didn't need me there. He invited me on. Let's think about that a moment, because what must have occurred? What must have been our relationship where he felt comfortable inviting someone onto the flight deck who needn't to be there? He'd just been certified. He got me off his back, you know, after months of training. So that links to what we were talking about a moment ago, that human connection, you know, the relationship. The deeper and broader our relationship, the more we will accomplish. Relationship is the foundation of what we accomplish. And we only need to deepen and broaden that relationship a small amount to fundamentally impact in a positive way what we then go on to accomplish. So it was everything leading up to that point of that emergency that was so important. First of all, we'd got great relationship. I knew Callum. I'd known him for years. I knew his family. I'd helped to train him. That's important. We'd properly equipped Callum to do what we're asking of him. And so it wasn't like me just abdicating responsibility for my life and everybody else's. No, we'd equipped him. And it's exactly the same. You might not be flying an aeroplane, but heck, if you've got a company and you're on the cusp of signing a really important contract for a big bit of business, and you've got your new sales guy leading that discussion, it is so tempting to step in and take control. Yeah. So it's not just about flying an airplane, it happens all the time. But the thing is, if we always are the one to step in and take control, it's the equivalent of ending it with just one pilot. You can only fly from A to B instead of training and lifting up. So you've got lots of pilots, lots of salesmen who are appropriately equipped to go all over the world and deliver what you have to deliver.
Yeah. The other thing I found really interesting, you talk about the kind of the personal connection and building that relationship. And very early on in the book, you kind of go straight into the whole issue of commitment. And you talk about, you know, the role of commitment and the role of kind of fear, love, and courage within that. And we were talking beforehand, we kind of touched on this thing about commitment, but maybe just for the sake of the listeners, maybe just elaborate on the point you talked about, why you put it so early in the book, because it was the first thing that jumped at me when I actually opened that chapter, was kind of, gosh, yeah, it's interesting. That's up earlier in the book than I expected, but I loved it.
Well, thank you. Why it came up so early on is because some of my most challenging leadership experiences have when I've been completely in the unknown. And you've got nothing to guide you except the commitments that you've made. So let's link commitment to what we've talked about before, because it all starts with that reflection on oneself. What is deeply important to you? Not your new iPhone or your pay rise, but no, deeply important, those non-negotiables, as we discussed before. And when you can formulate those non-negotiables, you can turn them into stands. And a stand is different from a position. A position is against something and is dependent on a counter position to exist. But a stand is for something and doesn't depend on anyone or anything else to exist. And when we then put our stands into action, they can become commitments. Okay? And a commitment is not about signing a contract. You know, you and I, John, as honorable chaps, we could go into an agreement and sign a contract, but actually that contract doesn't mean anything unless we have personally made a promise to ourselves to follow through on our word. That's a commitment. a promise to ourselves. It's like, good heavens, this time of year, many people perhaps are trying to give up smoking. That's a classic, isn't it? And people might shout to others, say, yeah, I'm going to give up smoking, I'm going to give up smoking. But unless they've made that promise, solemn promise to themselves to follow through, it's unlikely that they'll give up smoking. Yeah. So that's what a commitment is, that promise to yourself. And why that is so important in leadership and why it comes right at the start is because when we're leading into the unknown, we have to have that handrail to guide us and that absolute resolute, I'm moving forward, I'm going to achieve and accomplish what I've set out to do in service of others. That's really important too, to keep us going. And that comes down to commitment. That's why it's first up in the
book. I know. I think it was very, very powerful. The other thing that you talk about, and this is, you know, about gaining the clarity about where we're going. What does winning look like? And you use the metaphor, which, curiously enough, it's a metaphor that I've often used myself, is about a jigsaw, right?
Yeah.
And where people actually, that, you know, the jigsaw isn't complete if there's one tiny little bit missing, and everyone's got to know what their piece of the jigsaw is. I suppose the two questions on that. One is, why do you think that clarity is not always made, or there's so much focus put on that clarity in organizations? And how do you get people to buy into that they own that piece of the jigsaw?
Okay, so the first question, let's deal with that. It links back to what we were talking about earlier, John. It's because of how we've been trained. We've been trained to be the person with the answer, to come up with the solution. And it's good. It feels good to be the one with the solution, the go-to person. And so using that metaphor of the jigsaw, it's like focusing on those puzzle pieces. We like to get in there. How that shows up often in companies is through, people showing up as micromanagers, you know, and we've all seen that, where the manager is on the shoulder of the specialist trying to do the job and getting in the way. But the thing is, if we as a senior person are focused on those individual puzzle pieces, it's very easy for people to forget about the big picture and how they're contributing to that big picture. So we need to focus on that picture on the puzzle box, because unless we focus on it as senior people, no one else is going to. They're going to be focused on their individual puzzle piece. And by making that picture on the box from a line drawing to watercolor to then vibrant oil and keeping that alive, it empowers our people to figure out themselves, more often than not, how to bring their puzzle pieces together in support of one another, rather than being, you know, siloed in their particular area. Keeping that picture on the box is so, so important. And addressing the second part of your question about how do you have people step up and contribute, that actually is the focus of the third part of the book. It's all about belonging. One of our really important roles as a senior leader is to nurture a sense of belonging, because when people feel, and it's all the human things, the feely stuff, when people feel that they belong, they are much more likely to choose to step up and contribute. Yeah. Very quickly, you know, I love simple examples. When our kids were very young, they played out in the street. It was a cul-de-sac, it was safe. They played out in the street with the neighbors' kids. But if we saw a stranger or a car coming past, we would go out as parents and we'd be accountable for our own kids, but we'd also choose to step up and take responsibility for our neighbors' kids. Why? Because we felt part of that community and we wanted to contribute, even though we might not have put it into so many words. We wanted to contribute. And so it is with an organization. If we make our people feel that we care, that's how we generate a sense of belonging. If we have them feel that we really care for them as individuals and human beings, they are much more likely to contribute way beyond what they are contracted to do. They're much more likely to be innovative and creative and hugely supportive of what we're trying to accomplish as a team.
I think it's very powerful. The other thing that I could see in the book is that you're a big believer in visualization, which I would share with you, Peter. And And, you know, how helpful has that been in the world? I mean, various different stages in your career and your current work. How important is that? And how can you get people to really, you know, take that on to become some really powerful force in their own life?
Yeah, I think it's vitally important, particularly when we're stepping into the unknown, because by definition, you know, we don't know what we're going to face, but we can focus on where we want to get to. So I use the example, I love mountain running. Just before our call, I didn't run up mountains because there aren't any around here where I live in England, but, you know, I ran across the fields and the rivers. But when I'm thinking of running up a mountain, I will visualize what it feels like at that summit. I can think of Snowdon in Wales, where I've run up there a few times, and I can visualize the trig point at the top, the sting of the cold air on my skin, what I can see on the horizon, which is a great metaphor in itself, but what I can see from that summit on the horizon. And here's the thing, the more viscerally connected, in other words, get our emotions, I talked about the feel, the sensation on the skin of the cold air, the more we can connect viscerally to where it is we're going to be, the more powerful it is. And it's like standing on top of that mountain, looking at the path where I've just come up, and no longer is that an issue because I've done it in my mind. And that is what actually pulls me up the mountain. Now, very different from standing at the bottom of the mountain, looking up thinking, gee, that looks tough, but I'll give it my best shot. You know, and your best shot might be good, but it kind of lacks a commitment. Whereas you stand at the top of the mountain in your mind, and that's what gets you there. And I've never failed to get to the top of a physical mountain. And, you know, I've managed to accomplish a few other things in my life as well, but visualizing, because this links to that picture on the box thing, because if we can visualize it really powerfully, we can paint that picture for others too. And they can be inspired by that and join us and help us figure out which path we need to take to reach the summit. That's why it's so important. It's
so powerful, because one of the reasons, I mean, one of the reasons that I'm very big into is that I had a huge influence very early on in school, where I had a teacher that taught us one of the things that I've always been so grateful for is just the art of debating and standing up in public speaking, right? Yes. And one of the things, now I was only 13 or 14 at the time, and his trick was, he said, visualize the debate in your mind, play a video in your own mind of the debate, and that it's gone really well, it's been fantastic success, and feel how you feel. Yeah, how do you actually get all the emotion, the physical emotion, the mental emotions, you know, the joy of it, the excitement of it. And I just thought that was probably one of the greatest gifts that he ever gave in terms of education. And it's just so powerful.
It is. And very briefly on that, because I think it's so important. You know, I remember when Usain Bolt was running in the Olympics, and unlike the other competitors before the final, he was very relaxed. He was chatting to the officials and whatever. And people said to him afterwards, why are you so relaxed? He said, well, in my head, I've already won. All I've got to do is run the race. You know, I'm there. Now, what's important, this was not arrogance, you know, and I focus on the book. I talk about humble confidence, and humble confidence is a mixture between the confident bit, which is being absolutely resolute on where you're going, willing to take the decisions when they need to be made, and confident in your own strengths, but also having the humility to listen to your team and to be willing to put your hand up and say, look, I don't know how we're going to get there, but let me tell you the reason it's so important and what it looks like when we do cross that line. Yeah. And
absolutely.
That's humble confidence, and that inoculates against arrogance, because humble confidence is about the love for something rather than the position against something. It's about love rather than fear. Yeah. And that's why it's such a powerful drive.
Absolutely. Can I bring you back to what you talked about earlier on, Peter, in terms of the non-negotiables? And I'm just curious, for you as a leader, what are your non-negotiables?
Yeah, great. Well, I touch on this right at the start. You know, I've mentioned two already. There's my family, you know, which is common for many people, but also not being a burden on others and being in a position to lift others up and help others. A third one was another choice that I made. I'm chuckling because this links to a comment you made right at the start. You know, what am I going to turn left and do something completely different? Well, I was halfway through my degree at university when something happened in the world. It was 1982, and the Falkland Islands down in the South Atlantic were invaded by Argentina, who laid claim to them. And at the time, I remember it's nothing to do with the politics. That I didn't know about the politics of it, but I was so incensed that someone was imposing their will on others. The others being the Falkland Island residents who consider themselves British. And I just felt that was not right. And so I left university mid-course to join the Royal Air Force because I wanted to be part of an organization that I felt in the future could help people who could not help themselves. And how I articulate this now in terms of a non-negotiable is mutual respect. For me, mutual respect is hugely important. You know, when I travel around the world and people have got different views, whether they're political or cultural or whatever, it's about respecting who they are as human beings and not trying to impose our views on them, you know. And I pick up on this in the book. There's been some wonderful examples I've come across in the Middle East, for example, in Jerusalem, where there's a sense of mutual respect, and you can learn more about that if you read the story. But yeah, that's really deeply important to me, and lifting others up. That's what I'm focused on. And here's the thing: it's not like you have one non-negotiable or stand or commitment. It's likely that you'll have many. I think the opportunity is to be open and aware and looking for those things that you would characterize as non-negotiables, because as you build these up, as I say, it will enhance that reservoir of energy you have and give you greater confidence to step into the unknown.
I agree, and I think they also evolve over a period of time. Very much. I don't think it should be something that is static. I think it does have to be organic. Peter, this has been a great conversation, and I apologize I've taken longer time than I said I would with you, but I really highly recommend anybody who's interested in leadership, who's in leadership, who is leading to buy Leading from the Jumpseat, because I think you will walk away with some really, really good ideas and some really strong strategies to become a better leader. But before we wrap up, and you tell us where people can get in touch with you, two questions I ask everybody. One is a book other than your own that has made an impact upon you. What's the book and what was the impact?
Well, it's a book that I'm reading at the moment. It's called The Attributes by a friend of mine, Rich Davini. Rich is an American. He was a US Navy SEAL for many years, and he was focused on selection and training of US Navy SEAL Special Forces. And the book he's written is all about identifying what he calls the attributes, the traits, if you like, that each of us have, and using that not only to understand ourselves better, but also to hire the right sort of people who are going to fit well with our team. So The Attributes is available in all the usual places. So
all right, okay, yeah. That's a new one to me. So I love getting new ones. I got to my list. Second question is, it's daily rituals. Sorry, Peter.
Daily rituals. Sorry, I mentioned Richard's book has been out for about a year, I think, so it's still fairly new. Daily rituals. At the moment, I'm trying to change things. I think daily rituals are good, but for me, changing those rituals every so often is really good, because it keeps you more alive. And so I'm getting up early in the morning at 7 and doing about an 8-kilometer run through muddy fields and rivers and whatever. And that's my meditation.
Right.
Often after I've been running for about 30 minutes, I almost like wake up, think, well, where the heck am I? I'm following the same route, but my mind has, relaxed, and that's where I get my inspiration and ideas that pop into my head. So that's my big daily ritual at the moment.
Fantastic. Very well, on all sorts of levels. That's terribly good for you. Peter, this has been a joy. Where can people reach out to you? We'll put everything in the show notes, but if they're listening, where can they contact you?
You can find me on the internet. Leadingfromthejumpseat.com is my website. Lots of resources, videos, and whatever on there. Also, you can find me in the usual places on LinkedIn at Peter Docker, Twitter, and Instagram at Peter Docker. I've dabbled with TikTok, but I'm not quite there yet, to be perfectly honest with you, John. So I don't have much of a presence there. And the book is available in all the usual places, retail bookstores and online, and audiobook and ebook.
Well, listen, thank you for being such a great guest today, and continued success with the book and future career. And we look forward to catching up with you soon. And maybe when you've actually taken that next turn, we have to come back and have another chat and find out what you're doing this time round. Thank you, Peter.
I'd love to. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, John.